Aarvi Nandan looked like the perfect bride, radiant, graceful, and deeply in love. Ritvik Solkar looked like the dream husband from a family everyone envied. But behind the glittering wedding smiles and sacred vows lay a secret so dangerous that by sunrise, one of them would never see another day. What began as a celebration of love turned into India's most horrifying wedding night murder, after a single truth, hidden in a folded medical report, pushed an entire family to commit the unthinkable. The city of Pune had always been known for its colorful weddings, but none compared to the grand celebration of Aarvi Nandan and Ritvik Solkar. The streets outside the Solkar mansion were lit with golden fairy lights. Music echoed through the air, and guests in vibrant saris and sherwanis filled the sprawling lawn. Everything about the ceremony looked perfect, the kind of wedding that made newspaper pages and gossip columns. Aarvi stood quietly on the stage, her red bridal lehenga glittering under the lights, her eyes calm but distant. To everyone watching, she was a picture of grace and happiness, but inside her heart, a storm raged that no one could see. Aarvi had always been a careful woman, raised in a middle-class home by her widowed mother who taught her the value of dignity and silence. When her marriage was arranged with Ritvik, a man from one of Pune's most respected business families, her mother believed it was a blessing. Aarvi accepted it with quiet obedience, knowing that love was not always part of arranged marriages. Respect was enough, but fate had other plans long before the wedding day arrived. Months earlier, before the proposal, Aarvi had fallen ill with a fever that wouldn't go away. Her doctor had run a few tests, expecting something minor, but when the results came back, he hesitated before telling her the truth. Aarvi had tested positive for HIV. Her world froze in that moment. The diagnosis felt like a silent sentence, one she could neither reveal nor fight. Her mind swirled with fear. What would her mother think? What would society say? And who would marry her if they knew? The weight of shame, more than the illness itself, began to crush her. The doctor had told her that with treatment, she could live a long, healthy life, but in her world, diseases weren't just physical, they carried social punishment. Aarvi left the clinic with trembling hands, hiding the report in her bag as though it were evidence of a crime. That night, she sat in her room and stared at her reflection for hours, trying to see if she looked any different, if her secret was written somewhere on her face. She promised herself that no one would ever know. When Ritvik's family approached for marriage, Aarvi's mother was overjoyed. The Solkars were known for their wealth and influence, and the match seemed like a dream. Aarvi didn't have the heart to refuse, even as her secret gnawed at her from within. She convinced herself that as long as she took her medication and lived carefully, nothing bad would happen. The human heart can justify even the most dangerous silence when fear of judgment is stronger than the truth. The wedding day arrived with the smell of jasmine garlands and sandalwood incense. As the sacred fire burned and the priest chanted mantras, Aarvi's hands trembled slightly while holding Ritvik's. His eyes were filled with affection, but hers avoided his gaze, afraid he might somehow see what she was hiding. The photographers captured hundreds of pictures that day, smiles, laughter, blessings, every frame radiating perfection, but the camera couldn't capture what was buried beneath her smile. That night, when she entered the Solkar mansion as a bride, Aarvi felt a chill run through her, even though the air was warm. The house was filled with opulence, marble floors, gold frames, chandeliers. Yet it felt like she had stepped into a world where perfection was demanded, not felt. The women of the house examined her with approving smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They whispered about her beauty, her modesty, her family's simplicity. Aarvi smiled and said nothing. As she stood before the mirror later, still in her wedding attire, she caught a glimpse of her own eyes, wide, fearful, and uncertain. She whispered to herself that everything would be fine, that the past would never catch up. But somewhere deep down, she knew secrets never stay buried forever. And in that glittering house, surrounded by people celebrating love and purity, her hidden truth waited patiently for the night it would finally be discovered. The morning after the wedding should have been filled with laughter and the gentle rhythm of new beginnings. But for Aarvi, it began with unease. She woke early, long before anyone else, and stood by the window watching the faint mist rise from the gardens of the Solkar mansion. The world outside looked calm, but her heart raced with the fear of being exposed. Every footstep in the hallway, every knock at the door felt like a warning. She kept reminding herself that the secret was safe, that no one had any reason to search her belongings or question her. Yet a small voice in her mind whispered that peace built on lies never lasts long. As the day went on, the Solkar house buzzed with the rituals of welcoming the bride. Neighbors came to meet the new daughter-in-law, servants offered sweets, and family members took turns giving blessings. Aarvi played her role perfectly, quiet, graceful, obedient. But she noticed that Ritvik's younger sister, Neha, observed her with a curious sharpness, as though trying to understand the person behind the gentle smile. Neha was known for her boldness and her habit of prying into things others avoided. Aarvi didn't think much of it then, unaware that this very curiosity would become her undoing. In the evening, while Aarvi was in the prayer room lighting lamps for the family's prosperity, Neha entered the couple's bedroom to admire the bridal gifts. The room was still scattered with jewelry boxes, cosmetic kits, and decorative bags from the previous night. As she rearranged things, her eyes caught a small velvet box tucked inside Aarvi's trunk. Inside it, she found folded papers sealed in an envelope. Curiosity got the better of her. She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. What she saw made her heart stop. The documents were medical reports from a private hospital in Mumbai. Neha's eyes darted over the printed lines. HIV positive, confirmed. For a moment she couldn't believe it. The bride they had welcomed so proudly, the woman her brother had just married, was living with a disease their family considered unthinkable. Her hands trembled as she shoved the papers back into the envelope, but she couldn't resist taking a photograph with her phone. In her mind, this wasn't just information, it was a threat to her family's name, and she needed to show it to her parents immediately. When Neha revealed the discovery to her parents that night, the festive mood in the Solkar mansion vanished in an instant. Mahesh and Kalyani were struck silent. Their faces drained of color as Neha placed the reports on the table. For several moments, no one spoke. The sound of the ceiling fan was the only thing breaking the suffocating quiet. Kalyani finally clutched her head and whispered to her husband that they had been deceived, humiliated, and cursed. In their world, reputation was everything, and an HIV-positive bride meant social destruction. As the secret spread within the family, the atmosphere turned icy. Aarvi noticed the sudden shift. The servants no longer met her eyes. Neha avoided speaking to her, and Kalyani's welcoming smile disappeared altogether. That evening, as she brought tea for her in-laws, she felt their cold stares pierce through her. She tried to ignore it, assuming it was her imagination, but deep down she knew something had changed. By nightfall, Ritvik, who had been unusually quiet, avoided looking at her altogether. Aarvi sat alone in her room, feeling the weight of the silence that filled the house. The happiness she had forced herself to believe in just hours ago began to crumble. Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked like that of a newlywed bride. It was the face of a woman who could sense that the life she had built on secrecy was starting to collapse. Outside her room, in the hall filled with portraits of ancestors, the Solkar family gathered to discuss what they saw as a crisis. Aarvi's future was no longer being planned with care, it was being judged with disgust. The whispers grew into anger, and anger soon began to turn into something darker. By the end of the night, everyone in that house knew the truth. And for Aarvi, surrounded by gold and tradition, her new home had silently transformed into a prison. The night that followed was colder than usual. Even though the air outside was warm, the Solkar mansion, once full of music and chatter, now seemed haunted by its own silence. In the private family room, Mahesh and Kalyani sat across from each other, their faces pale and tight with fury. Between them lay the folded medical report, the proof that the woman they had proudly introduced to society as their son's wife carried a disease they considered shameful. The paper might as well have been poison. No one dared touch it again. Neha stood by the door, her arms crossed, watching her parents sink deeper into shock. The Solkars were not just angry, they were terrified. Their perfect image, their family pride, their carefully maintained reputation, all of it felt suddenly fragile. Mahesh was a man who had built his entire life on control. His business empire thrived because he never let a single flaw show in public. Now, as he thought about what people would say if they found out his son's bride had HIV, he felt humiliation rising like fire in his chest. He imagined the whispers at the temple, the pitying glances from other businessmen, the media headlines. Kalyani, who had spent years nurturing her family's social standing, saw it as an unforgivable betrayal. To her, Aarvi's silence was not a woman's fear. It was deceit. She believed that by hiding her illness, Aarvi had insulted them in front of the entire community. The conversation grew darker with every passing minute. Neha suggested that they could send Aarvi back to her family quietly, but Mahesh rejected the idea. He feared that once she returned home, her side of the story would reach the police or the press. In his mind, exposure was the real enemy. The more they spoke, the more their anger began to twist into something cruel. Kalyani's trembling hands slowly steadied as she looked at her husband and said that there was only one way to ensure silence, a permanent one. The decision, once spoken, hung in the air like a curse. It was the kind of thought that no decent person should ever have, yet in that room, it started to sound like the only logical solution. They told themselves it wasn't murder, it was protection. For the family name, for their son's future, for the illusion of perfection they refused to lose. Their minds built justifications faster than their conscience could protest. Mahesh turned to Ritvik, who had been sitting in a corner, pale and motionless. His son's silence was almost worse than the news itself. Ritvik's mind was torn between loyalty to his family and guilt for the woman he had just married. But his father's words were final. In the Solkar household, obedience was law. By the next morning, the plan had begun to form with disturbing precision. The servants were given the day off without explanation. A family dinner was announced for the evening, an event meant to honor the new bride before she officially took charge of household duties. Kalyani personally supervised the cooking, making sure everything looked festive and ordinary. To Aarvi, the gesture felt like a sudden change of heart, a sign that the coldness of the past day was fading. She tried to convince herself that perhaps they had accepted her after all, but the reality was far from it. In the kitchen, Kalyani slipped a small vial of clear liquid into her sari pocket, cyanide obtained through one of Mahesh's business contacts. It was odorless, tasteless, and lethal within minutes. The glass of juice meant for Aarvi was placed separately, identical to the others except for that single drop that sealed her fate. As the evening arrived, the family gathered at the dining table, dressed in fine clothes, their faces perfectly composed. The glow of chandeliers reflected in their empty eyes. Aarvi sat among them, smiling faintly, unaware that the people around her were watching her not with love, but with the cold anticipation of an execution. When she lifted her glass, no one spoke. When she drank, no one moved. And when she smiled again, believing that peace had finally returned, they all knew it would be her last. Upstairs, in the same room where she had once stood before the mirror as a hopeful bride, her wedding veil still hung on the chair, untouched, waiting as if it somehow knew that before the night ended, it would become a shroud. The morning sun rose gently over Pune, casting a warm glow across the Solkar mansion, but inside the grand house an eerie stillness lingered. The servants moved quietly, their eyes lowered, whispering among themselves. The usual clatter of breakfast preparation was missing. Mahesh had instructed everyone to remain silent about the previous night, and those who worked in the house had learned long ago that questioning the Solkar family's orders was dangerous. Aarvi's absence was explained away quickly. She had supposedly left early to visit her family. But no one had seen her leave. Her bridal jewelry was still in her room, her suitcase still untouched in the corner, and the bed looked like someone had never returned to sleep. By noon, the Solkar family had resumed their usual rhythm, or at least they tried to. Ritvik sat at the dining table staring blankly at his plate, his mind clouded by guilt. The memory of Aarvi's last smile haunted him like a ghost. Mahesh spoke to him in short, stern sentences, warning him to maintain the story. Kalyani pretended everything was normal, even telling the servants that Aarvi had traveled to her mother's home for a religious ritual. Neha, unable to sleep since the night of the murder, avoided looking at her brother altogether. The silence that filled the house was thick, heavy, and almost unbearable. Meanwhile, at the Nandan household, Aarvi's mother grew restless. Her daughter never failed to call after any journey, no matter how short. Hours passed without a single message. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Worry began to twist inside her until she finally asked Aarvi's younger brother Dev to check on her. Dev had never liked the Solkars much, but he tried to believe that maybe Aarvi had simply misplaced her phone. When he arrived at their mansion that evening, he was received with polite smiles and vague answers. Kalyani told him that Aarvi had left early that morning to visit her family. Mahesh added that she had seemed upset, perhaps tired from the wedding stress. Their words didn't feel right. Dev noticed the unease in Ritvik's face and the stiffness in Neha's body language. The house smelled faintly of burnt incense, but underneath it there was something else. the lingering metallic scent of something hidden. Dev returned home, uneasy but determined to wait one more day before involving the police. 2 days later, when no one had heard from Aarvi, Dev went straight to the Pune police station. He filed a missing person report and gave all the details he knew: the address, the time he last spoke to her, and the strange behavior of her in-laws. Detective Anaya Verma, a sharp and experienced officer, was assigned the case. She had seen too many families hide their crimes behind walls of wealth and tradition, and something about the Solkar's story didn't sit right with her. When Anaya arrived at the Solkar mansion for questioning, the family was composed but visibly nervous. Mahesh welcomed her with practiced politeness, insisting that Aarvi had left the house of her own will. Kalyani added emotional touches to her version, claiming Aarvi had seemed unwell and perhaps confused. But Anaya's trained eyes caught small details: Ritvik's trembling hands, Neha's tear-swollen eyes, and the faint discoloration on the marble floor near the dining room that looked like it had been recently scrubbed. Anaya asked for CCTV footage from the house, but Mahesh claimed the system had stopped working the week before the wedding due to an electrical issue. That excuse alone deepened her suspicion. She requested access to the backyard and surrounding property. While examining the garden area behind the mansion, Anaya noticed a patch of soil that looked freshly disturbed, as if someone had recently buried something there. Her team began digging. At first, it was just loose dirt, but then the shovel hit something soft, wrapped in plastic. The air turned heavy. Kalyani's face went pale as the officers continued to uncover what lay beneath. Within minutes, the outline of a human body emerged, wrapped in a red bridal sari, the same one Aarvi had worn on her wedding night. Forensic experts arrived quickly. As they lifted the body from the shallow grave, one of the bangles slipped from Aarvi's wrist and clinked against the shovel. It was the same golden bangle her mother had given her for protection, now broken, its shine dulled by soil and decay. Back inside the mansion, Anaya looked directly at Mahesh and Kalyani. Neither spoke. Ritvik broke down in tears, his entire body shaking. Neha fainted in the hallway. The truth had finally begun to surface, and the mask of perfection the Solkars had worn for years started to crumble. The horror that began with a secret had now turned into a crime that no lie could bury. The news of Aarvi's body being found behind the Solkar mansion spread through Pune like wildfire. By morning, every major news channel had picked up the story, calling it the wedding night horror. Crowds began gathering outside the gates, journalists shouted questions, and the once proud Solkar family hid behind their curtains, faces drained of arrogance and fear replacing their pride. The police sealed off the mansion, turning the elegant home into a crime scene. Yellow tape lined the courtyard where guests once danced under lights. Now it was filled with investigators, cameras, and whispers of betrayal. Detective Anaya Verma led the inquiry with calm precision. The autopsy confirmed Aarvi's cause of death: cyanide poisoning. The toxin had been mixed into her drink on the night of the so-called family dinner. There were no signs of struggle, which meant she had trusted the people who killed her. Inside the mansion, investigators found the remaining vial of poison in a locked cabinet, along with Aarvi's missing medical reports. It was all the proof Anaya needed. The picture was clear. The Solkars had murdered Aarvi to protect their reputation. Ritvik was the first to confess. He couldn't bear the guilt any longer. Sitting in the interrogation room, he broke down completely. Between sobs, he revealed how his parents had discovered Aarvi's HIV status through Neha, how the entire family had panicked, and how his mother had insisted that the only way to save their family was to end Aarvi's life before anyone could find out. He admitted that he had watched her drink the poisoned juice, paralyzed by fear and obedience. His confession opened the floodgates. Neha followed, tearfully confirming that she had found the medical report and unknowingly set the events in motion. She claimed she never imagined her parents would go so far. When the police arrested Mahesh and Kalyani, they remained disturbingly calm. Mahesh denied everything at first, trying to use his wealth and influence to sway the officers. But the evidence was overwhelming. The poison had been purchased through one of his factory contacts, the burial site was on their property, and the timeline matched perfectly. Kalyani, who had planned the entire act, finally broke her silence when shown the vial and the medical documents. She didn't cry or beg. Instead, she simply said she had done what any honorable mother would do to protect her family's respect. Her words sent a chill through the interrogation room. The case became a national outrage. Protests erupted across cities demanding justice for Aarvi. Women's groups, health activists, and human rights organizations spoke against the deadly stigma that had claimed another innocent life. The truth about HIV was discussed on television panels. Doctors explained that it was a manageable condition, and yet society's silence around it had turned ignorance into murder. Aarvi's name became a symbol, not just of tragedy, but of how deeply rooted fear and shame could destroy humanity itself. In court, the trial was long and heavily publicized. The Solkar's lawyers tried to argue insanity, claiming that the family had acted under emotional distress. But the judge saw through their defense. Ritwik, racked by guilt, turned witness for the prosecution, confessing in open court that he was too weak to save his wife. The courtroom fell silent as he described the moment she smiled before drinking the poison. His words broke the nation's heart. When the verdict came, Mahesh and Kalyani Solkar were sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and conspiracy. Ritwik received 10 years for his role in concealing the crime, while Neha, who had cooperated fully, was spared jail time but carried the burden of guilt for the rest of her life. The Solkar mansion was seized by authorities and left abandoned. A haunting reminder of the night honor was valued more than life. Aarvi's funeral took place quietly in her hometown. Her mother, frail and heartbroken, placed the broken gold bangle, the one found in her daughter's grave, on the coffin before it was lowered into the earth. Dev stood beside her, vowing that his sister's name would never be forgotten. Months later, an organization dedicated to HIV awareness was formed in Aarvi's memory, spreading knowledge about acceptance and compassion. The story of Aarvi Nandan became a cautionary tale told across the country, a reminder that the deadliest poison is not what's poured into a glass, but the hatred and ignorance people choose to carry in their hearts.